PearsonRavitz's story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB/GYN at the height of her career. But when a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery, her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded PearsonRavitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, PearsonRavitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At PearsonRavitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, PearsonRavitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com today to schedule your consultation with the PearsonRavitz advisor.
Finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo and no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right, so I'm super excited for our interview and guest today, Dr. Stephanie Pearson, who's here with us today as an OB/GYN, but now has a new role and training as a licensed broker in insurance and disability. So thank you, Stephanie, for being here, coming on our podcast and talking about your story and the importance of disability insurance.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so I'm just going to let you start off right off the bat because I'm really curious to hear more about your story and to let our listeners know sort of what was going on, what happened to you in your career as an OB/GYN, and what did you know about disability insurance or any insurance, and what's the story that led you to where you're at now?
All right. So I'll give kind of the abridged version, but I was practicing OB/GYN in a community hospital outside of Philadelphia. And I got called down to a precipitous delivery, walked in the room, and actually one of my favorite patients. I've delivered 3 of her other kids. Baby number 4 should have just fallen out. But unfortunately, she was complete and didn't have anesthesia on board. And I don't know if you guys, remember this, but, sometimes women will kind of climb up the bed, right?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They call it labor, not a walk in the park. And I needed a couple nurses to help me. And I've been known maybe to raise my voice and say, look, have your kid, I'll fix the carnage, right? I look down at the fetal heart monitor and the hearts are just tanking. Like they were in like the 40s, but the head was right there. So I started yelling and, trying to get her in position. And as I got the vacuum on the baby's head and started to help kind of guide the kid out, she kicked me. The first time was right in my brachial plexus. My arm went numb. Tears, came instantaneously. And I still needed to get this kid out. So I thought I was doing myself a favor and I kind of twisted my body. And as I got the baby's widest part of its abdomen out, she broke free of 2 of my nurses who got pushed against a wall.
Whoa.
And the second kick kind of came across my shoulder. And I just knew something was wrong. I felt a pop and it hurt real bad. But I got the kid out, put the baby on mom's belly, left the room in tears, called in one of my senior partners. Fast forward, I get told that I have a torn labrum, but that professional baseball pitchers pitch with torn labrum, so I should be able to do my job. So like all good type A physicians, I put my head down and kept working, trying to figure out how to compensate. Now, interestingly, I am right hand dominant, but I'm a left-handed laparoscopist, right? Because as an attending teaching residents, you let them operate with their dominant hand. So I became really adept at using my left hand, and it was my left arm that was injured. And I was slowly losing range of motion. I was dealing with pain issues, all of which were being ignored. And because it was a workman's comp case, I had to see a certain person for the first like 90 days or something. And I was injured in December of 2012. In August of 2013, I got to the point where my husband was helping me get dressed in the morning. I was crying in the bathroom in between patients. And the kind of nail in the coffin was I got called down to do a section on a woman who the midwives had let push for 5 hours. Now, it's not a ding on midwives. There are some really good ones out there, but 5 hours is a really long time to let somebody push. And I didn't recognize my first assist. Well, the reason I didn't recognize my first assist, it was because it was their first C-section.
Oh.
And I physically could not get my left arm to do what I needed it to do to get this kid out. And I started crying. I called out stat for one of my partners because it was in the afternoon, who came down and did the delivery. And I went up into their office, sat down in tears and said, look, this is not ethical. Like, this is not the surgeon that I am. This is not the doctor that I am. If it had been 2 a.m. and not 2 or 3 p.m, I'm not going to get beat by a kid, right? I would have had to tee up her uterus, and I would have made her an obstetric invalid, meaning, sorry for non-OBs out there, if you have a upside down T on your uterus, you cannot try to have a vaginal delivery after that. She would have been that way because of me, not because of Mother Nature, not because of her body, not because of the baby. It really would have been my fault, and I couldn't live with that. So I went to see a new orthopedist who promptly said, do you mind if I call a couple of my students and residents in? And I was like, oh, you never want to be that patient. And he was like, what happened here? You have a textbook frozen shoulder. And I was like, I was told I could work, so I tried to work. So I had surgery, and I went to sleep getting told I'd be back to work in 12 weeks. And August 3rd this year will be 10 years. I woke up with my orthopedist sitting at the foot of my bed, which also doesn't really happen.
No.
I knew it wasn't good. And he said it looked like a bomb went off in my shoulder, and I would probably not get back. And I have not been cleared to do OB or to operate. In my medical records, it says I'm a liability. And 10 years of physical therapy, traditional medicine, non-traditional medicine, you name it, on a good day, I can get about 120, 130 degrees of flexion. But I have almost no internal rotation. I am still dealing with nerve damage, chronic pain issues. And then in 2021, I woke up with a frozen right shoulder. So they don't know if that's from years of wear and tear and overcompensation, or if I have a underlying connective tissue disease, but doesn't really matter.
But you should still be able to pitch, obviously.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I'll never forget that. And so ridiculous, right?
It's just like no compassion.
Wow.
Whatever. We'll let you go. I'm just starting to kind of.
Look, I talk about, in a different main topic, I actually talk about kind of the tyranny of perfection that exists in medicine and how not nice physicians are to other physicians. But
Correct.
That's a story for another day too. But I had actually been cleared to do office GYN as tolerated. I had also been asked to be the chairperson of our department before I went out. Unceremoniously terminated the day my FMLA was up, because in my contract, it said I needed to be able to do 100% of my duty.
Yep.
And like many physicians, I will admit ignorance. I had no idea what was in my contract, right? And so it was like getting punched in the stomach. Then, as if it can't get worse, found out that our hospital group long-term disability insurance didn't cover work-related injuries. So I was flatly denied and told I would have been better off had I fallen off my bike. I'm like, okay, so workman's comp will pay me. No, I was initially denied because they said while an injury occurred, my frozen shoulder was idiopathic or my fault because I kept working while I was injured, which is what I was told to do. So I had to sue the state of Pennsylvania for my workman's comp. And admittedly, I settled after 14 months and 3 court appearances, at which one they had a vocational specialist say that I could be a billing secretary because I had the aptitude to learn codes. I was suicidal at that point. I had written letters to my kids. I had written a letter to my husband. I thought that I was better off to them financially dead than alive and disabled. I had 2 private disability policies, but neither were exactly what I should have had. I'm glad we had them and continue to have them. We didn't have to sell our house. We didn't have to pull our kids out of preschool, but I was grossly overfunded for life insurance and underfunded for disability insurance, which I have found in the last 10 years is not super uncommon. Physicians are really an easy target. We're incredibly trusting and we want our patients to trust us. So we trust people probably more than we should. And I really started this business out of a sense of feeling as though I had not been properly educated. I wasn't being advocated for. When I needed help, the guy who sold me my policy really wasn't engaged. And I started lecturing to area residency programs really more as a like, look, this is what happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you. And people started asking for my help. And so I felt like the only way to do that ethically was to go and get licensed. And so I locked myself, in a room with my colored markers and pens and studied and took the test, and the rest is history.
Okay, this makes me super pissed off and super excited at the same time, because this whole rising from the ashes of absolute despair nigh unto suicidality to actually a new business and helping people with something that's actually really, really important. There's one point here to getting back to the physician contracting is you should go into a physician contract understanding, especially if you're working for a corporate entity that's not run by doctors, that as soon as you are not useful to them financially, you are a liability and they will get rid of you instantaneously because we essentially work for satanic assholes. That is, it took us a long time to figure, it took us 25 years to figure that out, but that's the case. Like, regardless if you're golfing with the CEO.
Yeah, there was no loyalty.
Yeah. The blue suits have no loyalty to you as soon as you stop chipping away at the cobalt with the little hammer. Mm-hmm. As soon as you aren't bringing money in, you are now a net negative to the system and they will extinguish you.
And I may not have been. Like, that's the part that really gets me. Like, I had a lot to offer being a chairperson. I enjoyed teaching. Like, I would probably still be doing office GYN if I could, right? The problem is I don't know what I could have done until I tried it. But I was told by multiple malpractice attorneys that if, God forbid, I missed anything, I was not defensible. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we know that people miss stuff just because, right? I mean, Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you have a frozen shoulder. It's not like you're a drug addict. I mean, like, it's like, come on, man.
You know,
you had a claim or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you're cognitively disabled. It means
and that was that was the whole thing. I felt like I had been really treated unfairly because, to your point, right? My brain still worked and I still had a lot to offer, but not in the way that I guess they wanted. And my contract did say that I needed to be able to do 100% of my duties, and I absolutely could not. So, tisk on me. And while I don't do contract negotiation stuff, I absolutely think that anyone starting out needs to pay the money to have a contract lawyer look at their stuff. I mean, we just don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, and there's some real simple tips. I just was interviewed for a job that I think I'm taking. We're trying to move across the country, and I need to just secure my license in another state. But one of the first questions I ask them is if there's a discipline problem or an issue or a complaint, who talks to me, who fires me, who reprimands you if a patient is upset? Like, does that go through an MBA, or does it go through another physician? Does it go through how does this work? Because that's the really, and there's lots of details in the weeds there as far as, time off, right. And, people go, I want to know how much time off I get and how much I get paid. Nothing else matters. No, actually, how they hire you and how they fire you are where you start the contract, and you work backwards from there.
Yeah.
Because that's a critical piece to the puzzle. Because you'll rapidly, I mean, we thought that we were unique in the situation we were in with negotiations and separations and so forth from corporate entities. And then we started the podcast, and then we started talking to people all over the country, and we realized it's exactly the same, absolutely everywhere in every single state. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it now.
But to your point, that especially physicians, I think you're right. More same way we do, and it's easy to just convince yourself that everyone else is looking out for the good of me and that HR department and all these people, because they're so nice when they hire you, and they got my best interest at heart. Get a lawyer, and
you guys froze.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
It could be our Wi-Fi crap. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. But I think now the residents, upcoming med students us talking about it, see it out on social media posts and education, that they're becoming a little bit more wise to getting contracts reviewed and really looking out for yourself, and that it's prudent to have a contract lawyer look at your stuff instead of just assuming.
Well, we think that people are looking out for us when the only person looking out for you is you. And so that gets into your wheelhouse, which is disability insurance.
Correct.
Which is you have, as a physician or as any professional, you have invested a tremendous amount of time and money into a very specific skill set that pays reasonably well. And especially for doctors, if you are disabled, it's not like you're an MBA where you can work for Coke or Pepsi, or you can work for John Deere and you could sell tractors, and, because business is business. It doesn't work that way. Especially if you're, fellowship subspecialty trained, we have a very expensive, very narrow bandwidth. So you have to financially protect that. And the first thing is not life insurance, it's disability.
I know, you hear
insurance.
about life insurance all the time. That's what gets pushed, but not disability.
Well, and when I start my lectures, I start by saying, okay, show of hands, who's got health insurance? Everyone's hands up, right? Who's got car insurance? Everyone's hands are up. Who's got homeowners or renters insurance? Some of the hands start going down, and they're like, oh, geez, right? Then I hold up my engagement ring and I say, how many of you have these insured? And you see a decent number of hands. And then I say, okay, how many of you have disability insurance? Maybe a handful, right? We're socialized, we're culturized to protect a lot of things in our lives, right? And if you look at Vegas odds, at actuarial data, what are the odds that I'm going to lose my engagement ring versus what are the odds my house is going to have a fire, right? How many people get all of these other insurances that they're really never going to use, right? You hope not to. And I get that that's where some of the pushback comes, right? It's not anything that people want to purchase. But if we look at what is our biggest asset to protect, it's truly our ability to make money. And I don't mean that to sound trite or salesy, but it's the truth. And I still had to pay off my med school loans, right? I had to figure out kind of what was next. And not everybody has that ability either. I mean, I do a lot of disabled physician outreach work, and not everyone can figure something else out, right? I was fortunate enough that I got out of my hole and realized that I did have other things to offer and turn things around, right? But a lot of us kind of get almost lulled into a false comfort of, oh, well, I have it through work, right? And I can't tell you how many times I speak to somebody and they're like, oh, no, my job gives it to me. I'm fine. And then I'm like, okay, well, can you get me the policy and we'll go through it together, right? And I get to be in this horribly unenviable position of pointing out all the problems with their group benefit, right? And then kind of parlaying that into why a private policy is so important.
Well, so first off, to your point about all the different insurances, I think so many of us get stuck in the life insurance piece, and that's all you think about. Whereas, because it's like you're either going to be dead until you want life insurance, or alive to protect your loved ones. But maybe you know this. I mean, what are the odds that you're more likely to be disabled than dead in your lifetime? I mean, so many people have something alter their career so that they can't do that. And they're not just physicians, but especially surgeons, right, who need their hands and their arms to work. But I'm thinking of any kind of, we see them all the time in the office. Like I see these people that are 50 years old and they've been doing these labor jobs and then they've got a bad back. I'm like, well, did you think you were going to shovel dirt till you were 65?
The answer is yes. They thought they were going to cut trees down until they were 70.
I was going to say the answer to that I know is yes. And we're the same. I mean, I thought I was going to die at the table. Yeah. Like I had this almost like fairy tale, fantastical idea that I was going to be old and still operating. And one of the young nurses was going to be like, Dr. Pearson, maybe it's time. Right.
Right.
Where I'd have a heart attack at the table. That was pretty much what I thought was going to happen. Not that I was going to turn 40 and lose my entire identity. But to the question, part of it depends on who you ask. So I do want to preface that. But according to the U.S. Disability Act data, you have a 1 in 4 chance during your working career of having a disability that keeps you out at least 6 months. So in the physician space, it might be a little bit lower. I don't know if 1 out of 4 is a fair number because that's, all stuff. Mm-hmm. And because all the carriers, it's proprietary information, I have tried relentlessly to get hard numbers on physicians and no one will give it. As far as people with term life insurance, right, which is really what the majority of us need, 94% of people do not use their term life insurance. They will outlive the policy. So you're looking at a 6% chance of using your life insurance and somewhere around 25% chance, maybe a little bit lower, of using your disability, but it's still way outweighs.
Yeah,
right?
But then there's short term and long term.
Right, but then there's another issue with high wage earners, physicians, narrow scope of skills. Let's say is that if you look at it, if it's industry across all industry and it's 25%, we live in a logging community that's really dangerous. There's Alaskan fisheries, which is really dangerous. Right. But those people are far more malleable in being able to be retrained
That is
because
true.
they usually have another set of skills. Like if you're killing trees, you know how to drive a truck or move
Right.
machinery or whatever it can be. So being totally disabled from your occupation is less likely. A couple extra cocktails and a fall down the stairs. If you're a nephrologist and you're not ordering dialysis kidneys anymore.
Right.
And that's, I mean, the risk may be slightly lower, but the downside, if you are disabled, is
Correct.
immense.
I tell people all the time, I do not consider myself a disabled human. I am a disabled OBGYN.
Yes, exactly.
There's still a lot of things that I can do, and I have to focus on that stuff, not the stuff I can't do, right? Like you're not going to see me doing a cartwheel on the beach. I can't get my arms up above my head, right? All my bras have to snap in the front, right? Like maybe TMI, but you guys are ESPN, so there you go.
That's right.
A little more information than you might have needed. But, there are things I can't do. And okay, I've better living through therapy. And I was able to focus and refocus and figure out what to do, right? Not everybody, as I mentioned, has that ability. And to your point, for super high earners who end up very niched, you want to be considered totally disabled if you can't do what it is you do to make money. You don't want to get told, well, you can go teach or you can become a secretary. No offense to any secretaries out there. You put yourself through school, through training, through all of that to do a specific job. And if you can't do that, there are not very many things out there that we can do to make what we were making practicing.
Well, for me, it would be OnlyFans, but that's sort of obvious. So I just wanted to get that cat out of the bag.
Show me the money. I'm just going to say, show me the money.
I'm just saying it shouldn't be that funny.
It all goes into her.
So I want to get into this whole business of why a private policy is necessary when I have my policy through my corporate job.
Okay.
And because that is a huge
or what's wrong with the policy at the corporate job?
Well, because the life insurance sucks. Like nobody would just. I mean, we've sort of outgrown life insurance at this stage of the game. So if I get any life insurance with my new job, whatever, that's all fine and good, and that's happy.
Gravy.
But who would ever rely on the life insurance, which is generally 1 year's salary?
Oh, a lot of people do. I hate to tell you how many people I speak to who also say they have that through work, and I have to tell them that they're grossly underinsured. We'll come back to the life insurance piece. So group policies, right? So 10,000 foot look, you have employer benefits and association benefits. And by association, I mean the AMA, the American Academy of Fill in the Blank. Those policies are being blessed because somebody's paying to have them be blessed. There's almost always issues with those. So I don't really talk about those. When we talk about employer benefits, they really come in two major flavors. It's either part of your benefits package and it's employer paid, or it's voluntary, meaning we have it. If you want it, you have to pay for it. And then sometimes they'll meld. So they may have like a core benefit that they're paying for, you can buy up, but you're buying up into the same shitty policy. So there are three big things that we really run into that show their inferiority. And it really comes down to taxation, ownership, and language. So I'm going to focus on employer paid because they're the overwhelming majority of policies, right? It's part of your benefits package. It's one line on your open enrollment packet. They don't have to give you a copy of the policy. They don't have to tell you the details. And oh, by the way, the devil's in the details. And you check a box, right? That's it. And then you forget about it. Well, if your employer is paying for a policy, that money is going to be taxable income. If you're paying for a private policy, you're paying with post-tax dollars. So they haven't figured out how to tax us twice. So that money is going to come to you tax-free.
Wow.
So big difference between money that's getting taxed and money that's not getting taxed. Additionally, oftentimes it's a percentage, and often it's a percentage of your base. It's not a percentage of your total income. That really hurts folks in the academic space who get paid in like 5 buckets, right? Their base, their teaching stipend, their RVUs, their overtime, their on-call. Only that little bit of base is really what's covered. And often there's a maximum benefit. And they don't have to tell us. We have to ask. I have seen it as low as $1,000 a month and as high as $35,000 a month. So there's a crazy wide range. When we talk about ownership, it actually doesn't matter who's paying for the group policy. They can pay for it. You can pay for it. They own it. They've created it. They're controlling it. And more often than not, they keep it. They tend to be employment dependent. So if you leave, you're not taking it with you.
No.
And I will also, there are exceptions to every rule, and one size fits one. It's not a one size fits all. I'm speaking in very general terms. So with a private policy, it's yours. You get to help create it. You ultimately control it, and you keep it. It's like having it in your back pocket. The goal is to get one policy when you're young, when you're healthy, and it's going to go with you wherever you go. So there's a term that gets kind of thrown around the water cooler called portable. A private policy is portable. The biggest issue is language. There's no standardization of language in insurance like there is in medicine. It is infuriating. I am convinced it's on purpose to keep people confused. Companies can use the same phrasing, but define it differently, or they can use different phrasing and define it similarly. Even if the same company has a group product and a private product, the rules don't cross. And so we also get kind of into this oh my God, sorry guys, I have word finding problems sometimes.
No problem.
Shit. Like you think that you have one thing without knowing the details. And so a lot of these employer policies will say that they're own occupation, but when you really read it, it may be own occupation for 2 years, and then it switches to any occupation. They can define own occupation as what's called held to the national economy or the local labor market. It is not specific to what one employee does at one employer site.
Whoa.
Yeah. Tell me if I put... I'm not kidding.
So we live in a beautiful little town that is a logging town, which obviously this is not super high economic activity. It's not, we're not living in Wall Street.
Yep.
So they could literally say, you might be in the top 0.5% of wage earners in that town, but we're going to go to the average of where you're from.
It's not the average of your town. It's that they can put 100 FPs up against a wall and say, this is what you should be able to do based on your training, education, and skill set, right? So not all family practitioners do OB, right? Some family practitioners do more procedures than others, right? Some do newborn care, some don't, right? I would bet that if I put you guys up with 98 other of your colleagues, you guys are not making money the same way. You are not doing the same things day in and day out. And it allows them to cast this really wide net of saying you're not disabled, right? And then also, most of them will define total disability as the inability to do your job as they've defined it and not be gainfully employed. I don't know about you guys.
So that means dollar, like I could go to Dollar General and still be gainfully employed.
So they all have different definitions. So some of them really would be that open. Some of them will say like that you can't find a job that makes 60% of your income or 50% of your income, but it really opens up, again, another wide net, because they're going to have a vocational specialist come in and ask you a million questions to come up with, here are jobs that you can do, right? And we tend to be highly educated and highly skilled against the average. And so I have the utmost respect for stay-at-home parents. I used to say the adage, I'd give my left arm to be home with my boys more. Mm-hmm. Turns out I gave my left arm to be home with my boys more. And after 6 weeks, I was ready to kill everybody. I am not meant to be a stay-at-home parent. And with that definition, there's a chance that if I go out and try to do something, they're not going to be responsible for paying my entire benefit.
How customizable is a private plan? Like, I think of
very,
so we were country doctors. I did OB, May didn't. I did vasectomies. I was a hospitalist. I would do vasectomies, work in the ICU, and deliver babies all at the same time, which is completely different than if I was working in a suburban center and all I did was drug and alcohol counseling. I mean, those are it's essentially two entirely different specialties.
Correct. So let me say one thing and then I'll come back to that. So the most important piece of a private policy is how they define total disability, and they change the word "and" to regardless. So you're considered totally disabled if you can't do your job, and that's where I'm going to get to in a second, regardless if you're gainfully employed in another occupation. Just changing one word changes the entirety of that sentence, right? Now you don't have to worry about losing any or all of your benefit while you're trying to figure stuff out, right? You get to focus on getting better. You get to focus on what can I do next and not worry about losing your benefit, right? When it comes to how they define your occupation, it's actually at two different times in a policy. It's at time of purchase, because we are all given what's called an occupational class. So, and this is not just in medicine. This is kind of all
across
people,
the board for everybody.
All working people, right? Mm-hmm. Like a pilot has an occupational class. A pediatrician has an occupational class, right? It's kind of the internal dialogue of the company for their risk management. And so how we kind of present the first policy, we ask, what are your duties? What's your skill set? For medicine, in the initial phase, it's usually what you're boarded in. That creates the initial occupational class. But at the time of claim, they truly look at what is it you are doing to get paid. And that dictates your occupation. So and that's a good thing. We want it to grow up with us, because when we got the policy right out of training, in training, and then moving forward, we're not doing what we did 20 years ago. And you don't want to be based on what you did 20 years ago. You want them looking at, okay, how is Stephanie getting paid? How is she spending her day? What is the physician who's treating her saying that she can or can't do? And they typically look back about 1 to 3 years, depending on the type of claim. And then that dictates what your actual occupation is at the time of a claim.
So I have a question. So basically, I'm thinking of our scenario. Well, I'll say me. So I started off doing family practice for many years. And then all of a sudden, that's mostly for me, sedentary, sitting, getting up, walking around a little bit, been between my desk and the patient room, doing some physical tasks. But then I switched to urgent care, which became 12-hour shifts on my feet, standing, running back and forth. So if I were to become, at that point, disabled to the fact that I had a back injury or I couldn't walk for 12 hours because if something happened to my leg, but I was able to get to a room to sit down most of the time, like I did in my previous job. So would that disqualify me then because they were basing it on the first policy?
No. So I have to preface this with, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a claims expert.
Right.
But what I can say is you got lucky because the pricing for a family practice doc versus the cost for emergency medicine, which is usually what they will code for urgent care, FP is a lot cheaper.
Oh, yeah.
And so you've been paying less, but they will look at you if you've done urgent care. That's what they're looking at. They're not looking at
what I used to do. Okay.
When you bought the policy. And that's part of the beauty of it, right? You don't actually want to just be covered based on your boarding.
Right.
Right. Because a lot of us end up going a little bit outside or a lot outside of our initial board certification.
Right.
And you want to be held to what is it? How is it? Right. They pull billing, they pull calendar, right? They ask you to take you through what's your normal day, right? And that's how they're looking at what's your occupation right now.
Perfect. I mean, for a lot of people starting out, they don't realize that you have this career and it starts this one way. And then you're right, whether you're a surgeon or not, you start to acquire different skill sets. So things change physically. What you're doing fluctuates, whether it's procedures,
right.
Using the limbs or not. It totally changes.
One of our friends started in ER and ended in cosmetic surgery.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Right?
I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Hopefully they got extra training.
Oh, yeah. Yes. No, lots of extra training.
I was like, that's a little suspect, but okay.
But to the point where, he's doing emergency medicine. Then he went back, retrained, but then started to have issues with shoulder from, repetitive liposuction type stuff. But yeah, your career shifts and changes so much, even in the scope of medicine. And it's that way for nursing,
it's like that for
therapy,
almost everything.
For everybody, yes.
And I think a lot of times too, in the physician space, people think only proceduralists need this. And that cannot be further from the truth. People, and I have to be honest, I don't understand this. We forget about our brains.
Look at the last 3 years.
Right? Like, and I'll say to somebody what happens if you get a TBI? What happens if you get hit with an autoimmune disease like MS, right? You're not going to be able to do your job. I mean, we had a client not too long ago who was not a proceduralist, but slipped getting out of their hot tub, broke their coccyx, had an S1 nerve impingement, and had trouble sitting, had trouble standing, right? Couldn't drive to the hospital, right? Like, who would have thunk, right? And so
to your point about the brain, I mean, that one, you think, well, even if I'm in a wheelchair, I could still think, and you're right. I mean, most people would acknowledge you're right. You can have a traumatic injury, cognitive stuff,
car accident,
MS. I mean, I have chronic migraines. Sometimes those come on. It's literally like I'm having a seizure. I can't find. Thinking's changed. Not that it's officially disabling, and that's a whole other story. But
did I hear menopause and menopausal cognitive
right?
Real.
Yeah. So all of those things, people discount them. But
yeah, and honestly, like the things that cause fatigue. I mean, we've had an unfair share of MS, Guillain-Barré. Like I remember reading about it. I've already had a couple of clients that have had it, and we're a young company. I mean, I'm actually surprised at how many people we've had go out, because we're going to be 6 in 2 weeks. Not that I'm counting, but as a young company who really focuses on young physicians, I'm surprised at how many people we've had go out, and the things that people have gone out for. You can't make this stuff up. I had somebody who was hit by a car walking through a crosswalk. I had who shattered their leg and, had some PTSD stuff. We had somebody who jumped out of a burning house. Like,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we have the run of the mill, and I hate saying run of the mill. Last year was a really bad breast cancer year. I think a lot of women put off getting screened during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But most of my breast cancer gals tried to go back to work in some capacity, and were able to get some benefit back based on kind of how we tailored their policies. Going back to your original question of like, how personalized can we get? Vary. There are, I call them kind of the pieces of the puzzle, and what's important to you may not be important to your best friend. And so we get to actually go through like, okay, what does make up a policy? What's important? What may not be as important? What's negotiable? What's really not negotiable? And I am nothing if not brutally honest and completely transparent about that stuff. I am never going to have somebody purchase something that I wouldn't purchase.
So
now that I know what I know.
It is, from what you're describing, is this the policy that is really the one that you can personalize the most? I mean, usually life insurance is pretty blanket, house insurance sort of type of thing, I'm thinking. But this is kind of like financial planning. It's very personal because everybody's goals, destination, wants, needs, amount they want to spend is different. So disability insurance is very personal because everybody's occupation is different. Exactly what you're doing is different. Income, strategies, etc. Okay. So this should be the most important thing in all insurances we get.
I think so. Granted, I'm a little bit biased, but it is so important to be properly educated and advocated for. And, the carriers change pretty regularly. I mean, just this year, we've had one company drop out of the space. We've had 2 companies change their product design, but only in certain states because other states take longer to get passed. And so, it's not rocket science, but you have to stay on top of it. And you have to know, what's changing, what's different, and help people understand it. I mean, it's not that confusing, but it can be.
Right. So if you're fresh and new and starting out and getting your first private disability policy and your career changes, how often do you need to revisit, update it, change it? You can't assume that it's one and done and you're good to 65.
There's a short answer and a long answer to that one. One of the things that I feel really strongly about is keeping in touch with people, partly because, my guy sold me mine and I never heard from him again. So we touch everybody at least twice a year. If you are going from training to attendinghood, that's a big life change. If you're changing jobs, if you're getting a big increase in your salary, if you move states, not because you have to necessarily switch your policy, but when I said kind of the goal is to get one policy and be done for your career, sometimes it actually does make sense to reevaluate because there are some states that are super expensive. And if nothing has changed in your medical history that would, preclude you from getting certain things covered, every now and again, there is somebody where I'll say, you know what, let's just take a look and see how expensive it would be if we started over. And that's the exception to the rule, but it happens.
Okay.
So the question I always had is, so you have this policy through your corporate employer, which may be a total turd, but it's there. So do you run into danger of over insuring yourself disability wise? I mean, you can buy as much life insurance as you're willing to pay for.
You can't buy as much disability as you're willing to pay for.
Right. Because you can't be worth more disabled than able-bodied.
And again, there is an exception there. But when we're in training, everybody qualifies for the same amount. Once you're outside of training, the game changes. And it doesn't matter how shitty the policy is. It is all based on internal algorithms that look at how much money do you make, what benefits do you receive, and who pays for them. And then they tell you what you can get. So like, you can't say to me, Steph, I want $20,000 in benefit. I'm willing to pay for it. If the math doesn't work out, the math doesn't work out. And it sucks, to be quite honest, because remember when I said I've seen them as high as $35,000 a month? Mm-hmm. There are some people who didn't get policies as residents who entered this attending arena, and I can't get them a lot of coverage privately because their group benefit caps them out. And that sucks.
Yeah, see, I've heard of that, and I wanted to make sure
it happens. And, that's one of the big pushes for doing this when you're in training, because they don't really look at how much you make or what benefits you get. It actually is one of the few times that we can be overinsured. When we sometimes see attendings get overinsured is if they switch jobs from one that had a high cap group policy and they went to a company that has a low cap. Then they may end up actually being overinsured. Or did I say that backwards? I said that backwards.
Backwards, yeah.
If they have a low cap and we were able to get them a lot of coverage, right, and then they go to a high cap, in theory, they're overinsured. But I'm not going to recommend that they let go of the private policy unless it's cost prohibitive, because they're actuarially, they are more likely to have their private policy pay out than they are their group policy.
So are there lifestyle considerations? Because
yes.
I think of when I should have had a private policy and didn't. And I was a skydiver. I had dirt bikes.
Too.
I had motorcycles. I barefoot water ski tournaments, downhill skiing.
And who got disabled from doing those sports?
She did, but that's besides the point. Mm-hmm. So I always took every cognitive job I could.
So yes,
because I wanted to be able to work from a wheelchair. Like literally, I told my friends that.
Listen, I get it.
I need to be able to work from a wheelchair.
No,
and
I get
the amazing thing was,
if
you go in hard, because I'm not doing long-term disability. So that was her. She's just like, go straight to life insurance. It'll be fine.
So yes, there is an avocation questionnaire. And they do look at high risk stuff. And I too, one of my favorite things was jumping out of airplanes. I can't do it anymore, but they ask about skydiving, scuba diving, rock climbing, motorcycles, racing of cars, horseback riding.
Define racing of cars. Anyway.
No, like organized racing of cars.
Organized racing. And horseback riding are the big ones. Mm-hmm. And there's also a difference of, do you do it once a year on vacation versus is this something that you do a lot? And for disability insurance, they will put in an exclusion that they're not going to cover you if your disability results from that activity. So they look at those just like they look at pre-existing medical stuff.
Okay, so that's fair. That's just reasonable. If you have a skydiving injury and you're disabled, that one's on you. If you trip and fall down the stairs, bringing the groceries into the house, that's
that's on them.
Too bad. Yeah.
I guess the other thing that's popping into my head, because I've used short-term disability a lot, is so when you're buying a private policy, this is including both, correct? Short-term and long-term. Oh, okay.
So we really only focus on long-term. Private short-term policies are pretty expensive, and I am a big believer in emergency funds. So I tell people, if there's a short-term benefit through your employer, get it. If you know that you are planning on having a baby, it may be worth going to the Aflacs of the world, but we're really talking about long-term stuff.
Okay. No, that's important, because for myself personally, having multiple orthopedic things that require time off work, but are short-term, that are 12 weeks, then you're right. You either save up for it or use your group policy if that's available.
And the thing is, some of the long-term disability carriers will let you opt for a 30 or 60-day elimination period, but they're much more expensive. And most people will have one or more of the following, right? A short-term benefit through work, an accrual of PTO, and or an emergency fund. And I always tell people, look, you want money working for you. You don't want money working for me or an insurance company. So sock the money away, let it make some interest, and it's there for a rainy day.
Yeah, usually that's the better option if you do the math.
Right.
Absolutely right.
But I like old cars. So, we all have our thing.
My goodness.
May wants a pool at our next house. So yes, it's an emergency, isn't it? I think paint on the Trans Am is an emergency. So yeah, this is really good. And it's also a reminder of what insurance is. It's not a rainy day fund. It is a financial vehicle to save you from a catastrophic financial loss.
Yeah.
Period. So you shouldn't want to use it.
Correct. Right? Like I would almost kill a puppy to be back in the OR, and I would still be practicing if I could. And I wish I was properly covered. And, again, it goes back to insurance at its root, right, is a gamble. Every kind of insurance that we have, it's so that you can go to bed at night comfortable knowing if something bad happens, you're going to be okay. And that's all insurance is. No one wants
except health insurance. Health insurance is prepaid health care.
Health insurance.
That's a drum we've been beating, which is a completely different bunny trail.
Yeah.
We shan't go down.
It's a completely different animal. Right. I mean, completely different.
But real insurance, yes, is it like, look, if you have a $500 car ding, pay for it. Don't claim it. I mean, there's just, if your car gets demolished or God forbid something happens and you kill somebody because they ran out into the middle of a highway, thank God you have insurance, right? I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, at the end of the day, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Oh my gosh. We have had these stories with friends, and it's just horrific.
Yeah, and look, I don't want people eating cat food to have insurance. There are ways to make it cost efficient or effective, right? You don't necessarily need to purchase the maximum benefit if you have other assets, if you live a different way, right? Like, I feel like I'm the one person that tells people just because you qualify doesn't mean that you have to buy it all. It's what are your spending habits like? What are your fixed costs? And I tend to tell people, think of your fixed costs, but you still have to add some because stuff comes up that you just can't ever think of. For us, our boys were 4 and 6 at the time. I couldn't put dishes up. I mean, it seems so silly, but I couldn't, do things that made no sense to me at the time, but we had to hire a house cleaner, right? We had to hire dog walkers, and things that you just don't think about come up. And just about everyone that I've talked to who's gone out on a disability claim has these weird things that pop up. And so I do always tell people, think of your fixed costs, but add like 10, 15%.
Smart, very smart.
No, this is really great.
Thinking about your whole story, I mean, that could be a whole other podcast episode, is how to finagle the workers' comp system when you have an injury like you do. And
there's really not a whole lot. I mean,
I know.
If you don't mind, I mean, we would love to have you back and just discuss the how you climbed out of the hole.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Again, I have no secrets. I mean, I will tell you the workman's comp part, honestly, I've blanked out. Like I actually can't explain a lot of that stuff.
Well, we know just doing primary care and trying to work with our patients that are either rightfully fighting for it or, people that just the other side, but it becomes this entangled mess. Even my heart breaks for.
Yeah, but it's the Wild West because there are people that truly abuse the system. Right. There's absolutely no question. Exactly. And so I understand the defensiveness of workers' comp, where they're like,
and I understand that in the private space too. I mean, I've gotten challenged now 3 times kind of every 3 years I get brought up. And this last time was the first time that I was like, you know what? This guy is just doing his job. There is somebody at this insurance company whose job it is to figure out who's being fraudulent.
Yeah.
And I know people that have been fraudulent, right?
Yep. Right.
And so we need these people so that the people who need to get paid get paid. And it really changed my mindset going into that meeting from being like super defensive and, dare I say, bitchy, to being almost empathetic for him, because I knew I was going to cry, and, I knew I was going to get upset. And you know what? They're not going to find pictures of me doing things. Like, I'm being honest, right? And so if you're being honest, the system works.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little more difficult. I tell everybody black and white cases get paid, gray cases get challenged. But as long as you're being honest and forthright, every client that we've had that's needed to go out has been paid.
No, and that's wonderful to hear, because I had a case where this was before there was tablets, and they literally brought a VCR and a crappy TV into my office and set it all up, and I'm have this meeting for however long, an hour, scheduled out of my schedule to talk to some it was a PI actually. Mm-hmm. And she goes, okay, this is the lady, and the last time you saw her, you said she can only work 2 hours in the grocery store because she has disabling, whatever, sciatica or something. And she goes on to show like them following her home. She gets out of the car and she's driving 6x4 inch posts into the ground with a post hole digger. And I'm like, whoopsie.
Yes, she recovered.
She said, Dr. Hindmarsh, do you think that this changes your opinion on her disability? And I'm like, what do you think, Sherlock?
And we look, unfortunately, there are bad apples everywhere, and they exist in our profession too.
Yep.
And one of the craziest stories I've heard, because I've become friends with my disability lawyer, was a surgeon who was literally injecting lidocaine into their fingers and claiming that they lost sense of feel. So when they would get challenged, it took a PI to prove that this person was doing that. Like, you're kind of effed up if you're going to those measures, right? But that person doesn't deserve to get paid.
No, unless they have a mental disability, right? Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think
that's sad.
I just see the wheels turning. No, I see May going, man, I want to be the PI that figures that shit out.
Yeah, it's like everything else. I bet the bread and butter of being a PI is pretty boring, but like, I bet when it's cool, it's really cool. I used to want to do a Femme Nikita. That's in my,
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been awesome, and really so helpful and eye-opening even to us who knew that it was important. But I hope that everybody listening gets their asses up off the couch and then looks you up and says, hey, help. Can you go over my stuff?
Just get your financial house in order, man. It's life insurance, it's disability insurance, it's an emergency fund, it's putting away the right percentage into long-term retirement fund. It's a lot. It's just a bunch of baskets, and you just have to throw some cash into the baskets, which might mean the Tesla Plaid waits for a few years, but that's okay.
Yeah, adulting is hard, and most of us weren't given a blueprint for adulting.
No,
exactly true. So, Stephanie, I will let everyone know where to find your company or the best places to reach you for those that want to get in contact with you.
So our website is PearsonRavitz.com. Hopefully you'll spell that out for them.
I will.
I'm on Instagram personally and professionally. I'm on Facebook personally and professionally, and I was not smart enough 20 whatever years ago to have a pseudonym, so I am Stephanie Pearson. And I think I'm the most accessible human ever now. So, yeah.
So you're all over the
I'm
web,
all over.
and I have your
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm like all the places. I don't tweet. I think I have a Twitter account, but I really don't tweet. I don't know of the youngster stuff. like TikTok,
and I don't know what else there is nowadays either.
You could do some frozen shoulder dancing. I'm sure that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we will have your links, and we will share them in the show notes as well, and on our social media posts too. Thank you again for being here.
And happy to come back anytime. Like I said, I'm an open book.
Absolutely. Have a great day, and thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.